I'll hand it over to Alyssa. Alyssa?
Thanks, Evangeline. Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Naeem. I am the task lead at the NSF Includes Coordination Hub, or I should say NSF Eddie Bernice Johnson Includes Coordination Hub. I work on an area of our work called Network Engagement and Capacity Building. We're excited about this virtual chat today, focused on sustaining partnerships with minority serving institutions, or MSIs. This slide just shows an outline of our conversation today. I wanted to, before we get started, wanted to recognize a network member who brought this idea to light, to our attention, and has been helping us in the planning of these events. This is the second of a series of conversations that we're engaging in, and our goal over the series of these conversations is really to share different partnership models to help folks understand what it takes to both build and sustain partnerships among MSIs and non-MSI organizations. And hopefully, ideally, that we'll be able to identify potential partnership opportunities for network members to facilitate. So as I said, this is an outline of our conversation. I'll kick us off with a brief overview of the NSF Eddie Bernice Johnson Includes Initiative and the National Network. Then we'll hear from our panelists from the Native FEWS Alliance, who will share their experiences with building and sustaining their partnerships. And then we'll have some time for some discussion. So we hope that you will add comments and questions to the chat, and we'll also have some real-time discussion saved at the end. So we really want it to be an engaging, interactive, informative conversation. So moving on to the next slide. The Includes Initiative is one of NSF's 10 big ideas, meaning that it's one of several high priority investment areas. It's really designed to transform education and career pathways to help broaden participation in science and engineering. And the idea is that by developing these network collaboratives and partnerships, that Includes will help strengthen strategies to broaden participation in programs that have a goal in moving the needle towards equity. And the vision of Includes, when it was started, really begins with language around catalyzing the STEM enterprise to work collaboratively for inclusive change. And the vision also goes on to speak about increasing participation of populations who have been historically excluded or underserved in STEM. So there's a real intention of centering equity in all of the work of all of the grantees, as well as the national network. And speaking of the national network, on the next slide, we just have a display of who's in the network. Of course, there are Includes grantees in the network. We also have other NSF participation, broadening participation programs, and other stakeholders committed to broadening participation in STEM. And we also have industry and foundation partners represented, as well as many federal agencies. The next slide. This slide just shows who, a little bit about the representation of who's in the network, a little more about that. So about 2/3 of members in the network are from higher ed. And then of those members, about 40% are from minority serving institutions, and that's the graph in the middle. And then the graph on the bottom right just shows a breakdown of the types of MSIs represented in the network, and this segment of the network is always growing. So the takeaway here is that MSIs are an important constituent within the network, and this really aligns with our topic today about elevating issues of partnership and really what it means to partner in an equity-centered way. So I'll pause here and hand it over to my colleague, Simone, who will do an introduction of our panelists so that we can get started with the conversation. Simone?
Alyssa, we may have lost, I think Simone.
Nope, I'm here.
You are here.
I'm here. Sorry about that. Yeah, I was going to say thank you, Alyssa and Evangeline. I appreciate that, that scope of what we do at the Includes Hub. And my name is Simone Soso. I am the program director of the Quality Education for Minorities Network, but I'm also part of the Coordination Hub. I serve as the task lead for the Network Expansion and Diversification team. And I'm very excited to talk about this amazing set of panelists. And the Native Food, Energy, and Water Systems Native FEWS Alliance is focused on the crisis in access to food, energy, and water in Indigenous communities, and the paucity of educational and career opportunity pathways available to Indigenous people to address this crisis within their communities. So this panel consists of various members of this FEWS Alliance. And I'm going to start with Dr. Alice Algogino, who holds many impressive titles. She is a PI of the Native FEWS Alliance, Roscoe and Elizabeth Hughes Chair in Mechanical Engineering, Product Design Concentration Founder and Head Advisor of the Master of Engineering Program and Professor of the Graduate School at the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Coletta Chief is a Dine hydrologist, best known for her work to address environmental pollution on the Navajo Nation and increase the participation of Native Americans in STEM. Dr. Chief is also a PI of the Native FEWS Alliance and is assistant professor and assistant specialist in the Department of Soil, Water, Environmental Sciences at the University of Arizona. Dr. Diana Dalbotten is a co-PI and community-based partner on the Native FEWS Alliance. Dr. Dalbotten is the Director of Diversity and Broader Impacts at the University of Minnesota. The focus of her work has been on broadening participation of underrepresented students, and particularly those of Native American backgrounds in STEM fields. She collaborates with tribes in Minnesota and nationally to advance this work. Her work has been on understanding the practice of community-based participatory research on environmental issues in education and geosciences. We have Ms. Rita Martinez, who has for over 15 years managed and done many research projects and serves as Vice President of the American Indian Development Associates, LLC. Ms. Martinez manages multiple research, evaluation, and assessment projects with varying methodologies and topics in tribal locations nationwide. She is a Native FEWS Alliance evaluation team member through Native Pathways, where she provides input on the evaluation design, data collection, and analysis. And last but not least, Mr. Mark Kleitis is a PhD candidate and a PhD NRT trainee at the University of Arizona in engineering, as well as a tribal college faculty member. His research includes Indigenous food, energy, water, and security nexus, with an emphasis on engineering, energy, and water infrastructure on Indigenous lands. Mr. Kleitis has worked with Navajo tribal programs and with implementation of various program goals and objectives. So I want to welcome all the panelists. So thank you all so much. And we're going to start off with Dr. Algogino, if you would like to begin with kind of an opening and introduction to FEWS.
I'd love to do that. Thank you. Could you change the slides? Thanks. You know, FEWS stands for Food, Energy, Water Systems, but it has big impact broader than that in other fields as well, including environmental sciences and health and well-being. Carletta Chief from University of Arizona and I are PIs of the Native FEWS Alliance. Our longer title is Broadening Career Pathways in Food, Energy, Water Systems with and within Native American communities. At the University of California, I'm joined by co-PIs Marco Hatch, who is from Western Washington University, Matthew Potts, who is from UC Berkeley, and co-PI Carrie Billy, who is head of the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, and that serves as our backbone. Carletta Chief, could you update your bio? I think Simone may have had an older one for you, and tell us a little bit about your co-PIs.
Yes, thank you, Alice, and thanks for the opportunity to be here today. And I am a director of the Indigenous Resilience Center and the PI of the Collaborative University, the University of Arizona. And at the University of Arizona, my co-PIs are Dr. Greg Barry Gafford, who does work in agrivoltaics, Dr. Kelly Simmons Potter, who does solar, and Dr. Valerie Shirley, who does Indigenous education. Thank you.
And I'd like to point out that over half of our leadership are Native Americans. Next slide. So this is our vision and goals. I mean, basically, we want to increase and widen career opportunities relevant to Native American communities. And we're doing it through these 4 steps that are interrelated and cyclical. We want to address the FEWS, food, energy, water systems challenges in Indigenous communities. We want to co-develop between all of the partners integrated Indigenous place-based FEWS curricula, mentoring, and practice experiences, using and sharing wise practices from people who have been successful in the past. We want to transform the institutional STEM fields to be relevant and accessible to Indigenous communities. And so that means having examples that are relevant, place-based, learning opportunities and internships that are place-based as well. And then use this curricula and interventions to recruit, retain, and graduate Indigenous students to pursue higher education and careers in FEWS and bring their knowledge back to their communities. Next slide. And to do this, we have to look at the entire pathway. And this is why we are the Native FEWS Alliance. But pathways is an important part of our longer title, starting with pre-college and then moving into tribal colleges and universities, as well as undergraduate programs. And the tribal colleges and 4-year universities or community colleges are included there as well. Moving into graduate programs, certificate programs, and professional practice. So whether a student graduates with a bachelor's degree or a graduate degree, it's important to be able to have professional understanding and the ability to work in the field. Faculty development, community-based partnerships, Indigenous data sovereignty, and Indigenous knowledge are all part of what we're doing. And what you see is a picture of our networked improvement community. We're using both qualitative and quantitative data to better understand what the problems are and where we can go and how we're doing. We start out with the large-scale planning among all of our institutions. We're doing pilots and executing them right now. We're observing and evaluating. We'll analyze and rethink those frameworks and continue the scaling for impact. Next slide. This is another way to look at the Native FEWS Alliance. It goes through the pathway, pre-college to academic and professional careers, but it tells a little bit about some of our partners. If you include the partners of our partners, we have a complex alliance. We have over 40 of them when we include the partners and the partners of the partners together. And you see some examples here in this slide, and some of them are represented here today. So when we get to the discussion, they can talk more about their work. Next slide. And this is our leadership team, and this is how we're organizing this complex alliance. I and Carletta Chief are the PIs. The backbone is critical to the operation with the American Indian Higher Education Consortium. And Carrie Billy has just done a fantastic job of organizing us and working with not only the tribal colleges, but the entire consortium. And we have external evaluators that are from tribal or Native pathways that are using Indigenous evaluation methods, and we're learning a lot from those Indigenous evaluation methods. We have an Alliance Council, which is all of the PIs, Indigenous Research Ethic and Advisors is Marco Hatch. And then we have leads in each of the stepping stones, we call them, along the pathway. And so you see the list of the program leads here, and we'll be joined by, I think Dal Botten is one of the leads that will speak to that, Diana, when she gives Q&A. Next slide. And this is a little more detail on our leadership team. And as I said, over half are Native American, but we have someone coordinating at each of the levels along the pathway. Next slide. And so we overlay our networked improvement to consider indigenous methods. And what you see here is a result of that kind of thinking, systems thinking associated with how we can improve our community. And so number one is the planning and preparing that I talked about earlier. But one way to view that is what seeds and gifts have been chosen. How will the gifts support the seeds? And then who will benefit from the harvest? And that was important to think about when we first started the Alliance and we made and worked during our planning year. Next step was caring and tending to the garden. Where and who will plant, water, and tend the crop? So who are the leadership? Who are the people tending the crop? Who is essential to this project? Who can help? And who actually signs up? And then we need to observe the garden, get feedback, and make improvements in what we're doing. How will we see, hear, smell, and remember the blooms and fruit successes and bugs and pests, the challenges? What is success and who should help us define it? And then we always want to remember to celebrate the harvest and reflect on what we've done and accomplished. What and how can we learn from and share our seeds, plants, and experience? Where to tell the story of this seed. And so storytelling is an important part at all steps along the Native FEWS pathway. So next slide, I think I'll just summarize that. This is how we want to significantly broaden participation in their Native American students. We're starting with wise practices from past work. So almost all members of our Alliance have a track record of success in the pathway that they're representing. We want to evaluate the findings in terms of what we've been working on with our Alliance, but we always want to ask the questions, what did we miss? What still needs to be improved? And what have we learned? So thank you. The next slide is just a summary of how you can find out more about us. So we've got the Native FEWS Alliance website, and we have our contact information. Carletta, though, is the real heart and soul, I think, of the Native FEWS Alliance. Do you want to add anything, Carletta?
I just wanted to share how this partnership was developed. And what is central to our work is that we have been engaging with Indigenous communities for many years now, working with tribal colleges, doing learning modules. And part of that went into a training program called the Indigenous Food, Energy, Water, Security, and Sovereignty, which is a national research traineeship, where graduate students were being trained on how to work with Indigenous communities. And Dr. Agogino also had it in our team at the University of Berkeley, which was focused on co-design with developing and Indigenous communities. And at a NSF NRT workshop that was held in Montana, Alice and I met and had a chance to share our programs and realized how there was complementary efforts in both of the programs and how it can be further expanded and developed upon. So we decided to do a workshop proposal. And so UC Berkeley submitted that, and we did a workshop with tribal colleges. And it was a series of 4 workshops, including listening sessions with graduate students. And it was right at the height of the pandemic. And so we had originally planned this to be all in person, but due to the pandemic, it went online, but it still allowed us to have multiple conversations. And that's how the partnership formed and developed through many, many conversations, which is a really, I recommend a really great way to do proposals with Indigenous community is to really be involved with them before the proposal writing and all the way through the proposal writing. And so we're really excited that AHEC is our backbone and being part of this greater collaborative environment with the Native FEWS. Thank you.
Thank you for Carletta for sharing some of the history. We also are continuing those workshops because we're adding new partners. We have a mini grant program, we're adding new partners. And so we're continuing the workshops. Diana, do you want to add anything about your community-based research methods?
So I've been working with the research experience for undergrads on sustainable land and water resources for a little more than a decade. And that's a partnership that formed between me and Anthony Berthlat, a professor at 6IhwXRvWtOc College. And so all of our students come, some stay on the reservation in Montana, some up north on the Fond du Lac Reservation, and then others here in Minneapolis, working on community-based projects that are developed by tribal groups. And we think that those projects have been particularly inspiring to students and encourage them to go on and do research along those lines in their future. Many students have gone on to graduate school working on community-based research and tribal participatory research projects. I think starting with projects that raise out of the communities is one of the best ways to inspire young people to continue into research projects, particularly students from Native backgrounds.
Thank you, Diana. Mark, you wear many hats in our alliance. Which ones do you want to talk about?
I think I'm gonna narrow those hats a little bit. I want to give a brief background. I am part of the historical background, being a cohort graduate student in the FEWS program, and being trained in that cohort. I mean, that program really enlightened me and enhanced my capabilities as a graduate student. Now, as a PhD candidate, has allowed me to do more of my work with the particular Native communities and a better way of communication with the type of communities. I want to say the reason why now where I'm at San Carlos Apache College, when I was in the process of getting through, now I just passed my comps and the candidates said, I felt like I would be a better niche at San Carlos Apache College because I wanted to get my feet wet going into academia. My background has been a lot in more of the corporate sector, private sector, and coming into academia was a huge twist for me. But with the help of the Indigenous program and this alliance, it's helped me to properly engage, to be of effective faculty at a tribal college university. We're at the youngest tribal college university. We are a tribally serving institution. We are going through the process now of becoming a TCU to be federally recognized, and as well as our accreditation. So I'm coming into this organization, working with the community, working with students from the ground up. And now I'm the only STEM faculty at San Carlos Apache College. So what I'm doing here is establishing the pathways for our students from our TCU into the bigger universities and establishing the partnerships and connections with faculty at the bigger universities, because I've learned that our students coming from TCUs where they're just starting out, I work with a demographic that are very non-traditional students, and I'm talking about age range from 25 to 45. Our median age range at our campus is around 30 to 40-year-olds. And it's a big transition for them to leave their communities to go to bigger universities. But I'm establishing these pathways with people I trust. And that's the reason why I'm part of the Native FEWS Alliance, because I trust that once I send my students as they go through their disciplines here at San Carlos Apache College, that they can matriculate on in their future educational endeavors. So that's what I am doing as a part of a TCU faculty. I also work with AHWC now. I'm blessed that I was able to get a couple students to work with AHWC last summer in their climate resilience project. I also got our first USDA Tribal 1994 Tribal Scholars. Last year, I got one student to apply, and they're the first from San Carlos ever to receive that scholarship. That's kind of kudos for me because I was really pushing that student. So when I see motivation of my students, I kind of go in this mode of like, you got to do this. You got to do this. I'm a highly motivated person in doing that when I see the potential of our students. And then when I trust that they are looking at these other institutions to progress their education. I tell them that I'm connecting you with these certain individuals because I trust them, and please represent your family and yourself well as you go to these institutions, because that's what I do.
And I'm sorry.
No problem.
I was excited to hear you all's responses. And as I was listening, I was thinking about how you all were developing your own partnerships. And I like the note that you made, Dr. Chief, when you talked about the importance of being brought in to the development of a grant early in the process. You don't want to be thought of as an afterthought in the development of a grant that impacts a population of people that you truly care about. And I think in talking about that, includes is all about systems changing. And how are you all impacting systems change? What are your focal areas? Can anyone speak to that?
Well, I think those were the 4 bullets I had in the beginning of the slide. Is that you just don't change the numbers by recruiting more. You've got to change the system. And we very much have a systems approach, and our evaluation is very much a systems thinking of what's going on. That's why we're not looking at one segment of the pathway, but looking at the entire Native FEWS Alliance pathway from K to Gray and professional activities. But I forgot the question. I'm sorry.
I can add on to
please,
that.
Carletta.
Yes, yeah, Alice is right about that systems change. But what's unique about our work is that we are indigenizing and decolonizing.
Good point.
That systems approach in a way that elevates Native intellectualism and elevating community knowledge, local knowledge, identity, culture within the Native American communities, while connecting the different partners and facilitating the journeys of Native American students from step to step of their career journey. So we call these stepping stones. And so all of our partners have extensive work within Native American communities and are doing excellent support for Native students. But what is makes us stronger is working all together to connect us and to facilitate that in a way that elevates indigeneity through the Native food, energy, water systems.
Great. And can you all speak to how you all are incorporating culturally responsive evaluation into your plan?
I'll go ahead and answer that question. Thank you for having me. First and foremost, I think hiring Native Indigenous evaluators to do the work is really critical to having a culturally responsive evaluation. We as Native researchers and evaluators bring a unique perspective to the work that is really grounded in our own tribal communities, customs, values, and beliefs. And those perspectives really show up in the work, in the approaches that we're using to conduct the evaluation, the ways in which we are doing the data collection, the way in which we are analyzing the data and interpreting the data that we're receiving, really having a good understanding of that context in which these students, the Native communities are coming from is really, really important to understanding the data. And so we are also, really as an Indigenous evaluation group, incorporating Indigenous evaluation principles that are really centered on some really important core values. And, those core values include, community-based and participatory processes. We're really trying to be responsive and inclusive of the Indigenous values, beliefs, the traditional knowledge of our participants, as well as their contemporary knowledge, as well as, our, non-Native partners and allies. Their perspective is also important and vital to have because they're very supportive of this. And we want to make sure that we're also getting their perspective as well. We are looking to have a very strength-based evaluation. So, although we want to understand, the challenges and the needs and, the process and outcomes, we want to do so from a very strength-based lens. We want to know what's working so that we can build off of that and really have a very solutions, orientated evaluation plan. Relationships are really important, and having, especially in tribal communities, we really have to build relationships first so that we can have a shared vision and a shared understanding of the expectations about the evaluation. And capacity building is also important. So wherever we can, we're really trying to share our knowledge, share the way in which we are indigenizing evaluation processes with anybody who's willing to learn, so that we can extend the pool of Native evaluators, Native researchers doing this work. And then the last and, but not least, is respect for tribal data sovereignty. That's really important when we're working with tribal partners, because, we want to make sure that they're fully engaged in the process, that, that we follow their, own, laws and processes for review and approval of evaluation and research. And also, there are protocols around, data management and how the data is being used, and, just respecting their sovereignty about that. And so, with that, what does that really look in practice? So I talked about, indigenizing, some of our data collection processes. So for instance, we are incorporating, seasonal and cyclical calendars, versus, Western linear calendar systems to reframe, planning and implementation processes. Like the NIC, Alice showed you that earlier, the NIC model. And that's something that we really work hard to indigenize that process. We use a lot of metaphors and symbolism to engage participants in discussions through what we call a process called a talk story. And we usually use those to kind of help, identify needs, challenges, and solutions. But by using metaphors and symbolisms, it makes, the discussion more, relatable to the Indigenous people, because of our own oral traditions and our own storytelling traditions. Most of our languages were not written, so metaphors and symbolism can carry very deep meanings and are very useful in framing discussions around values. And so we used, several processes like that to help us define the vision for the Alliance. And we called that the River of Life process. And so by indigenizing these processes, we're really, making these processes more relatable. We're kind of humanizing the process so that, participants feel like, they're not the subject, of an evaluation or research, but that they are active participants in the process. And we're also, trying to model how to indigenize processes as well, because that is, one of the primary goals of this alliance, is to transform STEM processes and to infuse them with Indigenous science, Indigenous ways of thinking. And so really trying to model how that can be done so that this process can be shared as a wise practice for others to use, in their, data collection processes as well. And, the Alliance is really new. It's a new alliance, and they're still laying the groundwork. So they've planted the seeds, and roots are starting to grow. And now they're starting to tend to the garden. And now we're waiting for it to bear fruit. And as the Alliance grows, so will the evaluation, and so will the, the processes that we use to do the evaluation. So I'll just leave it at that.
No, that was very well stated, and I appreciated that equity lens in the incorporation of how you will do outreach and how you will connect with people, because I think a lot of times people don't understand that it's more than just coming out and speaking to people, but being able to talk to them in a way that they can relate to is critical.
Yeah, and people don't really, evaluation is always kind of a dirty word. People don't really like evaluators that much because they've had a bad experience, with evaluators. And so we really have to change that. We really have to focus on building relationships first and humanizing these processes so that, they feel a part of it and not the subject of it.
Thank you. Very well said. As everyone's been talking about that equity lens and even equity in your leadership and how you found it important to have a predominantly Indigenous-led team of advisors and specialists. And can you speak more to the equity in your leadership system, maybe perhaps even in how decisions are made or things of that nature?
I'd like to just start by pointing out that we picked the best people. We didn't make a decision that they were going to all be, we'll have a high percentage of Native Americans. It turns out those were the best people. And they were the ones that had the track record. There's the ones that had a foundation of wise practices. They're ones that had a successful track record that we could learn from. And so all of us, regardless of our Native American status, have benefited by their wisdom in their leadership.
Thank you.
From an evaluation perspective, I do want to say that the Alliance has really done a great job of really reaching out to the membership. The whole entire planning year, they had several events that was really focused on just getting feedback from the entire membership. And as the evaluation team, we analyzed that and gave it right back to them so that they could use it and incorporate that feedback into updating their goals and objectives and their tasks and activities. And so they did, they've been listening, and they are making sure that the voices of the membership are being heard. Just from an evaluation perspective, it's a really great thing to see.
Rita, let me add one thing. I've been through a number of evaluation practices, and I agree there have been some bad experiences. I actually enjoy the Native evaluation approach, and I feel like we are all learning from it, and we have progressive ideas of moving forward. So thank you for all your good work.
Thank you. I know that you all are a newer alliance, but have you all had any obstacles that you've had to face and overcome, and what might some of them have been?
I don't know who wants to address this, but I'll start. Please, others catch up. Contracting processes have been difficult. We're a very large alliance, and our systems just aren't set up. Maybe Carletta can speak to this because I think she's done a better job at University of Arizona. But some of the smaller institutions just don't have the infrastructure to do all of the work that's required of some subcontracts and NSF requirements. And Carletta, maybe you can speak to what you've done in your program at University of Arizona to accommodate this.
Yes. So when working with Indigenous communities, it's so important to minimize the financial burden that they could carry as a result of being involved. However, our universities don't support that type of mechanism where the institution has to actually front those expenses and then seek reimbursement. And similarly with students as well, many of our Native American students have multiple responsibilities in their communities, and as a result, have different and larger financial barriers or responsibilities as they go between their communities and colleges. And so we want to not add to their financial burden by asking them to front, travel costs or, any kind of participation costs. But because of our university system, I know at the University of Arizona, you can't pay in advance for students unless they're employees. And so each institutions have their own rules, but the general challenge is how we minimize that financial burden ahead of time. And it could require multiple paperwork for each individual student because we have so many students from all different institutions that can be a challenge. So it's a lot of advanced planning, coordination, working with our institutions to make sure that they understand that that's our goal, and then working with our partners as well. And so I want to give some time to Diana and Mark because they're both coming from community-based smaller organizations with who they're working with, where they see on the ground the need to support the communities and the students. And the challenge is we ask them when, we ask them to be part of a conference or part of activity or to travel here and there. So Diana, I'll give it over to you first.
Thanks, Carletta. I'm going to go roundabout of how I answer your question. I've always been an ally in the community. I'm a white woman, working in Native communities and have been for 20 years. And I find that to be a process of sort of moving from ally to relative. I guess I would say, much like marrying into a family, you can't come in and insist that everything has to be your way all at once. You have to get to know everybody, not just the person you're marrying into or whatever. And you have to develop that relationship, not just once, but year after year after year. And I really think those are important steps to working with MSIs or tribal colleges or underrepresented students, because then it's only by going there and listening and being there and taking your time to develop that relationship that you actually understand what the challenges are that those other institutions are facing, and they're different from yours. And you have to communicate also what the challenges are within the lead organization, in terms of reporting and following processes with your university and all of that. They're very real challenges, not just burdens that you're laying on the other institutions, but processes that we all legally have to follow. So I think all of that is really complicated, but if you think of it in terms of that developing into a relative as a metaphor for that, I think it's one way to understand how you can create strong relationships that go on. And then the responsibility that you have to spread those relationships as you go forward by bringing new people in. You wouldn't bring someone in who would harm your grandmother, right? So why bring someone into a partnership that would harm your friends? So you have to teach them how to come into a community in the right way as well. And through that means you can change institutions, not just individuals, because you can teach others in your institution how to be responsible relatives, I guess, or allies. So that's all.
Thank you. Mark, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I love the way Diana articulated that. I was laughing because when she said being married into the community, my wife's Danae, and understanding the clan system. I used to know how to introduce my whole self of the language. I can listen to it, I know it, but articulating is where I'm still working on that. And now it's funny because I'm working in an Apache reservation, and at San Carlos now we are actually incorporating not just San Carlos, we have White Mountain students now that are coming to our campus. So we have to know both reservations. And when I came in and took this job, that was the biggest thing. It's like listening to what the community wanted, not just from my leadership, but When I mean listening, you get a lot of that perspective from your students, because they're the ones who's coming from these communities and they're talking about those issues. And what I have done in the way I'm teaching my course, I make it in my course like the Rita was talking about. When we're doing evaluation, I'm not really doing evaluation in my class, but I'm allowing the circle aspect, like a talking circle aspect in my class, where I am introducing the students, like, I'm not going to make this a Western colonialized structure in my class. What I want from you guys is to come in my class to feel comfortable that what you bring your intellectual prowess in the class and what the issues of the community of how you want to learn. I'm teaching both environmental biology classes and I'm teaching computer information system classes. So I'm wearing two different hats. And a lot of people ask me, how do you do it? And I don't want to even go into that, but that's how I think. But each of my classes, the way I teach them is a talking circle. I have them do projects that integrate what they want to do. I give the autonomy to my students. I don't tell my students what the projects are, but they have to be a tribal nation issue that they have to relate their projects to, dealing with issues in the community or bigger tribal nations. And I have non-native students and native students, and working on two different projects from an environmental standpoint and from a computer information systems network. Those are the two major issues that are a lot in our community. Another thing my students like is how I've embraced the community to bringing in tribal scholars that are the community. I brought Otley, that I might be pronouncing that wrong. Dr. Chief, you can correct me on that, but I have brought their knowledge of roadmen and medicine into my classroom. I allowed them to come and speak. Other senior elders of the community, I have them speak. I brought in directors of the EPA, forestry departments, everything. These are professionals that work for the tribe to present in my classroom. The same thing when you're dealing with computers. I've brought people in from the telecommunications company to explain what they're trying to do for their infrastructure and what the issues they're having. This Biden bill that came down, great, hunky-dory, Mo and curly, but it's not really fitting the actual breakdown of the money that's going into these projects for the community. And the actual tribal enterprising companies for the tribe are not getting the proper breakdown of finance and the project implementation. So what I have done as an instructor, I've asked my students, you become the consultants. You be the active ones in your community and go ask, can we work with you, tribal enterprise or departments, and find small pilot projects to help them with their solutions. That's what I've integrated in my institutions. And one other thing, back to what Diana said, when you are married into this culture, I remember my wife telling me the very first thing she said, don't say a word. Learn to listen and observe first as you go into a community. And at the same time, while you listen and observing, don't go in the mindset that you're going in a research project and then, oh, I have to learn the language. I have to. A lot of times, and when you participate in ceremony, is if you listen, don't analyze it, take into the prayer and meditate and understand what you're going into with these communities and those issues, you go a lot further establishing your projects. And that's what has grown my awareness as a instructor at a college, as well as building that partnership with the community. That was my worst fear. Coming into a community, I had no background except for my wife's being Navajo. The languages are similar, Athabascan. But the biggest thing is what helps is if you understand language, do you understand the cultural practices, and embracing that community-based learning into your classroom. That's the way I've done it.
And I mean, that was excellent. I think, what everyone has been saying on this panel today is a collective voice of power. and strength. And I've been amazed as each person has been giving their expertise and opinions about how to, one, partner with Indigenous communities and also to execute this work. And so I will lead us into the question and answer phase of this panel. We have about 7 minutes. There's some questions that were already posed in the chat, so I'm going to read one of them off. And it says, this is from Ken Connor. Relationships definitely come first. How do you evaluate / characterize the relationships in terms of quality and robustness?
Can I take that one just real quick? I'll be real short. The way I've done that in the community, asking community elders or people to come and speak, is building trust in the community. You should not go in there as you're the expert. You should be the one, as you coming in as a family, and learn to observe and listen to what they want to bring to the table first. Sorry, Dr. Chief.
Oh, no, that's great. I just wanted to give that question over to Rita as our Indigenous evaluator, and surely understands the juxtapose and the lack of fitting between Western evaluation and Indigenous evaluation. Rita?
Yes, so there are definitely, challenges with, Western evaluation, approaches, especially, with regards to funding agencies and some of the expectations that they're looking for, where, a lot of times, the measures are sometimes more quantitative based. They're looking at, numbers served, rather than the quality of the service that's being provided. And so I think those are a lot of, the differences. We're really trying to tell the narrative and the story from a quality-based perspective, and not so much, numbers are important, but we really need to be making sure that we're putting those numbers into context, and filling those numbers with the stories of the people that are actually, benefiting from the alliance. And so that's really important. And I just want to say, Mark just answered it beautifully in terms of how you evaluate relationships. Trust is really important. And I think that really just kind of stands for itself.
Well, thank you. Okay, and I'm going to go on to the next question in the chat, which is by Teresa Murad. Thank you, Teresa. And her comment / question is, congratulations on building a very impressive alliance. You mentioned that you continue to hold workshops and add partners. What types of partners are you looking for? And how would partners engage with the alliance? Anyone who wants to take a go at it?
Well, I'll do a start and then invite others to kick in. But we wrote it into both, Carlette and I wrote it both into our collaborative proposals, that we would fund these mini grants. And we've decided to break it up into 2 groups. So the first mini grant competition happened in the first 2 years, and we've just completed that, and we'll have another one later on. And this was part of our sustainability plan. We knew we couldn't bring in everyone at the beginning. We need to lay the foundation. But there are great people out there that are doing great work that we can all learn from as well, and active work. And so we had a competition. We had a request for proposals. We had a mechanism to review the proposals. And I was amazed at some of the innovative ideas coming out and the new organizations we're working with. Now, not to say it's smooth sailing, because now we have to worry about all these subcontract problems that we're working on. We have to go back to, and if we don't already have a subcontract with them, then we have to go back to NSF to get that whole process approved through contracts and grants. And, some of these people want to do work this summer. And so getting all this done in time so that there's planning ahead for that is challenging. But I was almost in tears reading some of these proposals. The work was amazing. And so we're just so happy to invite in these new members, and we'll have another competition in, I guess, next year.
Great. Great. And did you want to add anything, Dr. Chief? I know we're running out of time.
Yes, we're really focused on the grassroots and the community, and we know that there are a lot of great work going on at the grassroots level that is Indigenous focused and Indigenous centric. And that's how we're trying to bridge that great divide from the university to students and to the community level in a way that really supports the students' desire and need to go back to their communities. That's the real strength of tribal colleges, is because they've been doing this for decades, where their students are non-traditional and they get to go to school at home doing research and education with their people. And so universities have a long ways to go to learn about how tribal colleges have done this. And that's really where the mini grants is important, because we are making that connection to the grassroots community organizations and tribal colleges. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I want to thank all of you. There are so many more questions I still even have for you all, but I appreciate your time and your excellent responses. And I'm sure others that have been joining in today really appreciate those as well. And I'm going to hand it over to Evangeline to close this out.
Thank you. And I just want to echo everything Simone said, and also thank you all for such a wonderful conversation. Like I just learned so much today, and I just want to tell everybody that we can continue this conversation. We will be posting a summary and even the recording in the National Network online community. And I do want to, I know we just have a minute left. I do have a poll, which I will launch so that, as we do more events, we kind of see what is most useful to all of you who are here. And I also want to tell folks that on the 28th of this month,